it's been described as the best DSLR ever made. But how does the Nikon D850 stack up? Is it really as good as they say it is? And is it worth buying the camera they dubbed the Beast in 2020? Well, hi guys, thanks for tuning in. I've now owned the Nikon D850 for the past 2 years. I purchased it in March 2018, and now it's just gone past March 2020. So after having it for that 2 years, I believe I've had it long enough now to give you guys an honest review and what I think of the camera. So let's start off on the things that I like. First of all, the Nikon D850 has the 45 megapixel sensor. Now, I rate this sensor as one of the best ever released. I mean, the color renditioning and the definition that you get out of this sensor is phenomenal. I really need a 45 megapixel sensor because I am a self-confessed cropaholic. I crop everything. I crop landscape, studio, portraits, birds, everything. And having that ability to be able to crop in and still get a relatively high pixel count image is very important to me. What I'm going to do is put up a shot that I took at a lavender farm earlier this year of a butterfly. And if you look at this butterfly, you can see as I crop in, literally you can see the individual hairs on top of its eyes. Now, that is incredible. And that's the thing I absolutely love about having a 45 megapixel sensor. The other thing I like about the Nikon D850 is just the feel of it in my hand. It basically encompasses all my hand. The pinky goes right down to the bottom of the grip, and it just feels really comfortable to hold. The other thing is it's a very user-friendly camera. The menu system is very easy to navigate. The camera is phenomenal for focusing in low light. I've had this camera in some very dim situations. In fact, the other day I was doing some long exposures with a 10-stop ND filter on the front, and yet I was still able to focus this, and it could see through the 10-stop ND filter and grab its focus point. It has an inbuilt time-lapse feature. You can either do 8K with stills, or you can do 4K internally where the camera puts the shots together for you and it spits out I think it's a 4K MOV file. I've done some time lapses in New Zealand that turned out really well using the internal 4K. The video quality that comes out of the camera is quite incredible. It shoots 4K and it also does 1080 at 120 frames per second. I've done some 4K vision in New Zealand where I was shooting mountains with a 80 to 400mm lens, and the results that I got out of it I was very happy with. The 1080 at 120 frames per second is also very handy to have. I've used that in places like Arrowtown in New Zealand, as well as doing some B-roll for my vlogs. The 3D focus tracking in this camera is quite remarkable. I've used it a lot in bird and portrait photography. In fact, I just used it recently on a wedding. But I have done bird photography videos before, and what I'll do is I'll leave you a link to a video that I've done before where I talk about the focus settings and the way I like to set up the focus settings on the D850. Now, very importantly, the camera is very reliable. It has never let me down. I've always switched it on, it always turns on. It does everything that I require it to do. I want to talk about the build of the camera. It is built like a brick, solid as. It's got weather sealing, which comes in very handy in a lot of different situations when I'm doing landscape photography. I've been in some very harsh conditions with it, and it has never let me down. Another feature that the D850 has is the fact you can close the back viewfinder, so it can stop light leakage coming into the camera while you're doing long exposures. A lot of DSLRs don't have that. The other strength with the D850 is it's just generally a good all-rounder camera. I've used it for landscape, I've used it for studio, bird, portrait, and wedding. The other thing importantly to me is it has 2 card slots. It's got an SD card slot and an XQD card slot. What I use the XQD card slot for is the redundancy feature where I have all my photos being backed up onto that slot. Another great feature is the focus stacking capability. You can actually set up the camera to automatically take focus stacking shots for you without having to do shots individually. Okay, so it's time to talk about the things that I don't like about the camera after using it for 2 years. First of all, the video autofocus. It is complete and utter rubbish. I just do not use it at all. I always shoot in manual. Now, this isn't really a deal breaker for me because I shoot mostly everything in manual anyway. Second thing I don't like is the weight. This thing is a monster when it comes to weight. And that really does play on your back when you're going on long hikes, particularly up mountains. So the fact that it weighs over 1 kilo, where most cameras nowadays weigh around somewhere like 600 to 650 grams, yeah, this is almost twice the weight. So the fact that it does weigh quite a bit then limits you about how many lenses you can take on hikes with you. So what I've got to really do is assess what type of photography I'm going to be doing on the hike. And then I either pack just 1 or 2 lenses to cover me for that time. I would really love a lighter camera so I could pack, say, 3 or 4 lenses that would cover a greater range of photography for me. Another little thing that I kind of don't like is the fact that once you go into 1080 at 120 frames per second in video on this, it basically goes into DX mode. And what that does is adds a crop, a 1.5 crop on lenses. So your 50mm lens, for example, would then go into a 70mm, or a 16mm I think would go into 24mm. It's not a massive deal breaker. In fact, sometimes you can use that to your advantage because if you've got an 80 to 400mm lens on it, you can turn a 400mm into a 600mm, so you can get closer to your subject. So that's great if you're shooting birds in slow motion. I'll put up this shot where I've shot some birds in slow motion in South Australia, and you can see that it's now cropped into 600mm. Now I will switch to a mirrorless camera system one day, but out of all the mirrorless cameras on the market at the moment, none of them really meet the exact specs and features that I'm chasing. In the meantime, I'm very happy with the D850 and the images and the video quality I get out of it. So would I recommend that you buy the Nikon D850 in 2020? Well, I'm going to have to say no. And yes. Let me explain. So when I'm saying no, I mean about 70% no and 30% yes. Now I know I've just said all these glowing things about it and it's a fantastic camera, but the DSLR days, in my opinion, are actually numbered. And if you're starting out in photography, buying a camera for the first time, it's probably best that you go down the mirrorless road because the advancements in this year alone will be amazing. The introduction of 8K video, for example, in the Canon EOS R5 that's about to come out, and the long-awaited A7S III. Well, who knows if Sony will release that. It'd be very interesting to see what that camera offers when it comes out. The other thing is the mirrorless range of lenses coming out are lighter and better in performance in both photos and video. So when it comes to the 30% yes in buying the Nikon D850, that is for those guys that have already heavily invested in lenses like I have, the F-mount lenses. And say for example that you are using say a D750 or a D800 and maybe you dropped it and you've broken it, or you're wanting to upgrade from a 24 megapixel sensor to a 45 megapixel sensor, then yes, absolutely, I would say go and get the Nikon D850. You will not regret it. Well guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this Nikon D850 review. I know it's a bit of an older camera now, getting on in years, but it is still a very, very good camera and it suits my needs, and I probably will keep this camera for a very long time. In fact, when I do switch over to a mirrorless system, I'll probably keep this camera as a backup. Thanks so much for watching and I'll see you next time.